Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? 2 years at Fort Campbell, no one noticed Staff Sergeant Briany E. Concord, just the communications girl. Just another headset, another voice in the endless radio static. Quiet, invisible furniture. Until the moment a general heard her speak words that weren't supposed to exist. Words only a ghost unit knew. Words that shattered her cover in 15 seconds. She had learned that silence cut deeper than protest. That was her shield. She spoke only what protocols required, nothing more. But inside, her voice was alive with memories no one else could hear. Fingers scarred not from typing but from climbing ropes in deserts no one here even knew she had walked. And all the while she listened to their laughter. Radio DJ, support staff. They didn't know what she carried, what she had lost, or why she kept hiding. It was Tuesday morning. The comms center was alive with static, routine, and indifference. Convoy movements, weather updates, supply requests, all of it ran through her and no one thought twice. She was furniture, invisible, a shadow among uniforms, but the truth was she was hiding in plain sight, not out of shame, not failure, necessity. Then came the call, a medevac request under fire, lives bleeding out through broken transmissions. And before she could stop herself, instinct rose. Tango 7 actual, standby, shadow frequency active, not standard code, not base jargon, something far older, darker, classified. Her tone had changed. Authority sharpened through years in places no one survived. And one woman heard it, General Egleston. Her coffee hit the floor, shattering across the tiles. Silence wrapped around them both. For the first time in 24 months, someone was really seeing Briany, not the quiet clerk, not the radio DJ, but something else. The general's eyes burned into her. Shadow 4, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. A name not spoken in 5 years, a name that didn't exist anymore. Shadow 4 had been declared dead, wiped from records, erased from history. 12 operatives in the Syrian desert, gone without a trace. And yet here one sat, disguised as a support specialist, headset on, pretending to be invisible. General Egleston moved with measured steps, her presence cutting through the noise. Sergeant, conference room, now. Inside, the walls hummed with white noise generators. The air was heavy with secrets. Shadow 4, the general said again, sharper this time. Briany's posture shifted, the slump disappeared, her shoulders squared, her breathing slowed. The years of discipline she'd buried came rushing back. "Ma'am, I don't understand," she said evenly, but her eyes gave her away. The general slid a file across the table, classified, red stamped. Staff Sergeant Briany Elizabeth Concord, age 28, communications specialist, standard training. No special operations experience. She paused. But that's not your real file, is it? The silence stretched, taut as a wire. Briany said nothing, but she didn't look away. 5 years ago, Operation Silent Thunder went dark. Shadow Unit, 12 deep penetration specialists, your team, Syria. We lost all contact. The position was overrun. We declared you dead. The general leaned forward. But you didn't die, did you? Briany's jaw clenched. Her voice came low, steady, unflinching. The mission wasn't over. The network was never dismantled. The same hands still move the same weapons. The same money still flows. My team, they thought they wiped us out, but they only killed the visible threat. For the first time in years, she allowed the fire inside her to surface. I've been tracking them, every shipment, every coded message. They're still out there. And I've been finishing the job. The general studied her, weighing truth against risk. You've been running an unauthorized intelligence operation, alone, from inside my base. I've been completing my mission, Briany corrected, her voice sharpening. Shadow 4 doesn't abandon objectives, not even when command buries us. The general sat back, exhaling. For a long moment, the only sound was the low hiss of the noise generator. Then her tone softened, curiosity breaking through the steel. Why here? Why hide as a communications clerk? Because someone sold us out, Briany answered. Her eyes burned with a truth too heavy to carry alone. Someone with Pentagon clearance. Someone who knew our safe house coordinates. I needed to stay dead until I found the leak. The general's chest tightened. You have a name. Yes, ma'am. Briany didn't blink. Confirmed 8 months ago, documented, verified. Who? The room seemed to hold its breath. Briany's words landed like stone. Someone with stars. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, dangerous. Both women sat across from each other, their lives now tied to a truth that could fracture command itself. General Egleston finally broke it. Shadow 4, you're recalled to active status, effective immediately. We finish this mission together. Briany stood, her full bearing now visible. Shoulders squared, head high, eyes unflinching. Not the invisible operator anymore. Not the communications girl. Permission to complete the mission, ma'am. Granted, the general said. And with that, the shadow stepped back into the light. No one in the comms center knew what had just been decided behind closed doors. No one noticed how her stride changed when she returned to her desk. But from that moment, every word she spoke carried weight again. The logs would record only one unusual line that afternoon. Shadow 4 operational. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by people nobody notices. Sometimes the strongest warriors wear the quietest masks. And sometimes, when the moment demands it, shadows step into the light to finish what they started. For Briany conquered, the time for hiding was over. What does it cost, carrying secrets no one else is allowed to know? For Briany, it had cost everything. Her team, her name, her place in the world. And now, as the general's voice cut into her silence, she felt the weight of those years pressing down, demanding to be spoken aloud. Because the mission wasn't over, she said. Her tone was flat, controlled, but beneath it fire burned. Because the network we dismantled in Syria didn't die with my team. They thought they finished us. They didn't. General Egleston leaned forward, her jaw tightening. And you've been tracking them from here, from inside my base. Yes, ma'am, Briany answered. She did not look away. I built a new line of surveillance, ghost routes, shadow frequencies. They still think I'm dead and I've used that to stay ahead. But she hesitated, her breath faltering. I couldn't stop them alone. The admission cracked something inside her. For years, she had told herself she didn't need anyone, that the mission came first, that grief and loneliness were weaknesses to be buried. But speaking those words to a general, words that revealed the fracture in her armor, made her feel exposed in a way gunfire never had. Eggleston's eyes softened, if only for a breath. You shouldn't have had to. The silence lingered, not hostile, not yet, but heavy. Finally, the general broke it. Who sold you out? Briany swallowed hard, her throat dry. Someone with stars, ma'am. Someone who signed off on our safe house coordinates. I don't know their motive yet, but I know their hand. And I have proof. Eggleston's expression hardened again. Do not say their name. Not here, not yet. That command carried its own warning. If Briany had lived in shadows for 5 years, then this truth was more dangerous than she had admitted, even to herself. The general rose, walking toward the secure terminal. From this moment on, you're not invisible anymore. You're Shadow 4 again. But this time, you're not finishing it alone. The words settled in Briany's chest like both a weight and a release. She had lived so long in silence, in exile, convincing herself her mission was hers alone to carry. Now someone else, someone powerful, was shouldering even a fraction of it. She wasn't sure if that frightened her or gave her hope. That night alone in her barracks, the silence was louder than usual. She lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling, her body motionless but her mind racing. She saw their faces again, the 11 who hadn't walked away from Syria, smiles frozen in memory, voices silenced mid-transmission, the smell of smoke, the heat of betrayal. Her chest tightened and she pressed her palms into her eyes until the pressure burned. They had died because someone had traded their lives for something. Power, money, favor. She hadn't known then, but she knew now. And yet she was still breathing. She turned onto her side, gripping the thin blanket until her knuckles whitened. Survival had felt like punishment more than privilege. For years she told herself she lived only to finish what they started. But what if there was more? What if being seen again, recognized again, meant she could finally carry their memory without drowning under it? A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She stiffened. It was late. No one visited her. She opened it to find Sergeant Mills, the one who used to mock her. He looked uneasy now. "The general wants you at Ops in 15. You're on the list." "The list," she repeated. He nodded, almost reluctant. "Special operations tasking. They're calling it classified, real classified. Never seen her move this fast." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Whatever this is, you're not just the comms girl anymore." When he walked away, Briany stood frozen. Not because of what he said, but because for the first time in years, someone else had noticed the change. She wasn't invisible anymore. At operations, the lights were dim, screens alive with maps and encrypted feeds. General Egleston stood at the head of the room. Around her, a small circle of trusted officers waited, their expressions sharp, calculating. "Shadow 4, the general said, gesturing to Briany. "No hesitation, no doubt. From this moment forward, she is our lead on this network. She has more intel than anyone in this room, and she has earned the right to finish what was started." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. A few looked skeptical. One even whispered under his breath. But Briany felt none of the old sting. She didn't care about their doubt. She had carried worse. The general turned to her. "You're not alone anymore, but you need to tell us everything, from the beginning." Briany drew in a slow breath. This was the moment she had delayed for years. The moment she had convinced herself would never come. And so she began to speak. About the network, about the transmissions she intercepted, about the proof she carried against someone wearing stars. She laid out the puzzle piece by piece, her voice steady, her heart steadying with it. As she spoke, the officers leaned in. Doubt gave way to silence. Silence gave way to unease. And then, finally, to belief. But belief came with consequence, because once they knew the truth, there was no turning back. And somewhere inside her, Briany knew, this was only the beginning. She stood there, heart pounding, the weight of their stares pressing into her. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible, and that realization was almost as terrifying as the memory of Syria. The maps glowed in dim light, lines of red stretching across continents, tracing routes of weapons and money. Her voice carried in the silence. They moved through fractured states, shell companies, humanitarian convoys that aren't humanitarian at all. I've tracked them from Aleppo to Tripoli, from Tripoli to Lagos. They adapt, but the signatures remain. One officer leaned forward, brow furrowed. "How are you so sure? How do you know it's the same network?" Her answer was steady. "Because the rhythm never changes. The codes shift, the channels rotate, but the timing always the same. I heard it in Syria. I hear it now. Same hands, same operators. They killed my team, but they didn't bury their own trail." The words hung in the air, not defiant, not boastful, simply fact. Eggleston's gaze locked on her. "You've been doing this alone, without backup, without clearance. Why not tell anyone sooner?" Briany's throat tightened. She hated the answer, but it was the truth. "Because I didn't trust anyone, not after what happened. Someone inside sold us out. Someone in command. If I had surfaced too soon, I'd be dead, and everything I knew would die with me." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she bit it down, straightening her spine. She would not let them see the grief still raw beneath her discipline. The general didn't push. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her tone. "Then trust starts now. We rebuild it together, piece by piece." Briany felt a small shift inside her chest. She wasn't sure if it was relief or fear. The officers debated long after midnight, deployment strategies, verification protocols, who could be trusted and who couldn't. She sat among them, silent at times, vocal at others, her presence no longer dismissed. Still, she felt their eyes flick toward her, some with doubt, some with curiosity, a few with something like respect. When the session broke, Egleston stopped her at the door. "Get some rest, Sergeant. Tomorrow we plan in earnest." But rest didn't come. Back in her barracks, the ghosts returned. She saw the burning house again, the one that had been their safe house in Syria. She heard the crack of rifles, the sudden silence of voices cut off mid-sentence. She saw the red glow of a flare against black sky. She had run that night, not because she wanted to, but because she had been ordered to survive, ordered to disappear. And for years she had asked herself if survival was a betrayal. Her hands trembled as she lit a cigarette, an old habit she had killed years ago. The smoke filled her lungs, sharp and bitter. "Forgive me," she whispered into the darkness as if her team could hear. "I wasn't done." She barely slept. At dawn, a convoy rumbled outside, engines idling. She dressed with precision, uniform sharp, hair pulled back, every movement mechanical. But her reflection in the small mirror caught her off guard. Her face looked different, not the invisible clerk, not the broken survivor, something else, something harder. At the ops center, Egleston waited, flanked by a smaller group of officers. Not the same crowd as last night, only those the general trusted. The air was heavier, more dangerous. "Today," Egleston began, "we test your intel. If you're right, we act. If you're wrong," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Briany nodded once. No argument, no hesitation. "Then let's start." The feeds came alive again. Satellite images, intercepted transmissions, fragments of coded chatter. She leaned in, headset on, her hands moving across controls like she was born for this. Her voice dropped into that cadence again, the one the general had recognized. Not the voice of the comms girl, the voice of Shadow 4. Coordinates flickered on the screen. A warehouse in Tripoli, another in Odessa, two branches of the same tree, weapons in motion. Her pulse quickened. This was it, proof. She removed her headset slowly, her eyes meeting the general's. "They're still moving shipments, and I can tell you where they'll be in 72 hours. Silence followed, thicker than before. Then Egleston spoke, her voice measured but hard. "Then we deploy." The room shifted, tension crackling like static before a storm. Briany felt her chest tighten again, not with fear, but with something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Purpose. She was no longer just surviving. She was no longer just hiding. She was going back into the fight. How does it feel to step back into the field after years in the shadows? For Briany, it felt like wearing a uniform made of memory, every stitch pulling her closer to the past she had buried. The deployment orders came quietly, without the usual fanfare. A file slid across her desk. Inside, coordinates, profiles, schedules, a warehouse in Odessa, another in Tripoli. Shipments scheduled, handlers identified, routes marked with surgical precision. Proof of everything she had whispered in the dark. 3 days, General Egleston said. "We move fast or the trail goes cold." Briany only nodded, but inside her chest tightened. She had spent 5 years behind radios, piecing together the fragments. Now the fragments were dragging her back into the world of steel doors, weapons checks, and insertion flights under cover of night. She walked into the prep hangar, boots echoing across concrete. The air smelled of oil, canvas, and adrenaline. Operators moved with efficient silence, checking weapons, loading crates, strapping gear. Their eyes cut toward her, some curious, some skeptical. She was an outsider in their world. To them, she was still the comms girl. But she knew their rhythm. She recognized the way their hands checked buckles, the way their boots shifted before a jump. She had lived that life before it was taken. A young operator muttered as she passed. Thought this was Tier 1, not babysitting staff sergeants. Briany didn't answer. She didn't need to. Silence was still sharper than retort. The general's voice broke the tension. She leads the intelligence package. Without her, you don't even know where to land, clear. The muttering stopped. Respect wasn't given, but orders were orders. Later in the quiet of her gear bay, Briany pulled on her kit. The weight of the plates settled on her shoulders, familiar and foreign at once. She traced her fingers across the radio pack strapped to her vest. Not standard issue. Modified. Customized. Hers. She had built it in silence over years of exile, piece by piece, like someone building a weapon in secret. She caught her reflection in a steel panel. The eyes staring back weren't the invisible clerks anymore. They belonged to someone who had buried 11 ghosts and still carried their names on her spine. The C-130's engines thundered as the team boarded. Briany strapped in, headset tight, eyes on the floor. The aircraft vibrated with the hum of men and women ready for violence. She stayed still, breathing slow, but beneath the calm her heart raged. When the green light flashed, the team moved. Briany followed, the cold air swallowing her as she stepped into night sky. Gravity ripped her downward, the roar of wind drowning every thought, and for the first time in years she felt alive. The landing was hard, gravel biting beneath boots. The Odessa coast stretched black and endless, the warehouse lights faint in the distance. The team moved like shadows, rifles raised, breathing shallow. Briany stayed in the middle, headset on, fingers steady over the radio triggers. 2 contacts on the east wall, she whispered, voice even. Rotation every 90 seconds. Blind spot here, she pointed, marking coordinates on the operator's wrist pad. Move now. They obeyed, not because they trusted her yet, but because her precision left no room for argument. Minutes stretched into hours. The warehouse loomed, guarded but sloppy. Smugglers, not soldiers. They never expected special operations to come hunting. Briany's heart raced as they breached. Shadows exploded into motion, doors kicked, rifles snapping, shouts silenced with swift precision. She stayed behind cover, radio up, her voice cutting calm through chaos. Left corridor clear, shift right, watch the balcony. Shots cracked, a body dropped, another surrendered. And then she saw it, crates marked with the same code she had tracked for years. The same markings from Syria, proof. Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, she wasn't in Odessa. She was back in the desert the night her team died. The smell of burning wood, the sound of betrayal closing in. Her knees threatened to buckle. But she forced air into her lungs, steadying her voice. General, it's them. Same network, same codes. This is confirmation. Silence crackled in her earpiece. Then Egleston's voice came low and fierce. Copy. Get what you can. We finish this. The operators moved fast, securing documents, drives, manifests. Every second mattered. Outside, engines roared, reinforcements coming. The smugglers weren't as blind as they seemed. The team exfiltrated under fire, rounds sparking off steel, shouting in foreign tongues chasing them into the dark. Briany moved with them, breathing steady, every step carrying both fear and fire. Back on the aircraft, sweat soaked her collar. The team strapped in, hearts pounding. No one spoke for a long time. Then one operator turned toward her, eyes narrowed. You called it, he muttered, every detail dead on. It wasn't praise, not yet, but it wasn't doubt either. Briany closed her eyes, exhaustion slamming into her. For years she had been invisible. Now every move she made mattered again, and though the weight was crushing, she welcomed it. Because this was only the first strike. And she knew what came next would be blood. What happens when the enemy outside isn't as dangerous as the betrayal within? Briany had asked herself that question every night for 5 years. And now, after Odessa, the answer was beginning to show itself. The mission was labeled a success, documents seized, shipments intercepted, proof gathered. But success didn't feel clean. It never did. Too many ghosts lingered in the spaces between victories. Back at Fort Campbell, she laid out the evidence. Codes, manifests, intercepted transmissions. Each piece a nail in a coffin she'd been building since Syria. The network was alive, thriving, fed by someone with power high enough to bury entire teams. General Egleston stood across from her, arms folded, eyes sharp. This is just contraband running. This is military-grade ordnance. Someone with access is feeding them. Briany nodded. And not just access, clearance. These routes, they mirror classified convoy schedules. Somebody is leaking movement data, somebody wearing stars. The general's face hardened. Do you have a name? Yes, ma'am, the words almost choked her. I've had it for months. But speaking it aloud, it meant crossing a line she couldn't return from. Naming the betrayal wasn't just exposing corruption. It was declaring war on her own chain of command. Egleston's voice lowered. Not yet, not here. Too many ears, too many eyes. We need proof ironclad enough to crush them, not just wound them. And so the plan began. More missions, more intercepts, pushed deeper into the network until the trail led home. The days blurred into weeks, briefings bled into deployments. Every operation carried more risk, more heat. Briany became the quiet center of the storm, her voice guiding operators through fire. She earned grudging nods, small acknowledgments, not trust yet but something close. Still at night the weight bore down. She lay awake with the folder under her bunk, proof of the traitor, a general, decorated, respected, untouchable. The man whose name was written on the last order Shadow 4 ever received. Her chest tightened every time she thought of saying it. Would Egleston believe her? Would anyone? Or would the system devour her like it devoured her team? The next deployment took them to Tripoli, a dockside warehouse, larger than Odessa, bristling with activity. Smugglers, mercenaries, and something worse, uniforms mixed among them. From her vantage point, Briany whispered into the comms, "You're not looking at freelancers anymore. These are trained. Someone's funding them directly." Gunfire erupted before her warning finished. The team hit hard, precise, but resistance was heavier than expected. Briany pressed herself against a shipping container, radio steady in her grip. Shift left, balcony 3 o'clock, suppressing now move. Rounds sparked inches from her face. She didn't flinch. Her voice stayed calm, clipped, surgical. The operators moved like she pulled strings, their survival stitched together by her commands. When the smoke cleared, the team exfiltrated, bloodied but alive. Among the seized cargo, one crate froze her breath. Inside, encrypted communications gear, stamped with a Pentagon procurement code. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid, not because of fear, because it was proof. Proof that someone inside had sold not just information, but equipment. Later in the secure briefing room, Egleston stared at the code, jaw clenched. This narrows it. Her eyes flicked up, locking onto Briany. You know who it points to, don't you? Briany swallowed. The name burned in her throat, pressing against her teeth. She had carried it too long. Yes, ma'am, she said at last, her voice breaking with the weight of it. And when I say it, you'll understand why I've stayed in the shadows. The general leaned in, her voice almost a whisper. Then say it. But Briany couldn't, not yet. Because once the name left her lips, nothing would ever be the same again. How long can a secret live before it poisons everything it touches? Briany felt that poison spreading. Every mission, every intercept, every face she looked at across briefing tables, it all carried the same shadow. The name she hadn't spoken yet. The name that burned like fire on her tongue. General Egleston's voice still echoed in her head from the last debrief. This narrows it. Her eyes had locked onto Briany, steady, demanding. You know who this points to, don't you? And Briany had nodded, because she did. But knowing and saying were two different wars. The next operation pushed them into Eastern Europe, rail hubs along the Black Sea, freight moving in the dead of night. Too many guards for ordinary smugglers, too much discipline for mercenaries. Someone had trained them. Someone had armed them. Someone had blessed them with silence from above. In the freezing dark, crouched near the tracks, Briany whispered into her mic. 3-man patrol, 70 meters, wait for rotation now. The team slipped past like water through cracks. Precision, discipline, but Briany's hands still trembled slightly against the cold metal of her radio pack, not from fear of being caught, from the weight of knowing who had enabled all of this. When the freight cars were breached, they found what she expected: crates stamped with cereals that only belonged to U.S. stockpiles. Proof again. Layers building on layers. An operator glanced at her in the dim light, eyes questioning. How deep does this go? She said nothing. Her silence was answer enough. Exfil was brutal, spotlights slicing the night, shouts in Russian echoing off steel. Rounds pinged as the team scrambled through gravel and mud. Briany's voice stayed calm, even as her chest tightened with every breath. To right cover, suppress and move. Go, go. Back on the transport plane, exhaustion hit like gravity. She leaned her head against the cold wall, eyes closed. But behind her lids she saw faces again. Her team from Syria. The night they died. The orders signed by a man who would later give interviews, shaking hands at ceremonies, smiling for cameras. Her fists clenched until her nails cut skin. Later in the secure briefing room, Egleston dismissed the others. Only the two of them remained. The general's face was carved from stone, but her voice was quiet. It's time, Sergeant. You can't hold it anymore. Who betrayed you? Briany's throat tightened. Her hands shook against her thighs. For 5 years she had carried this name like a tombstone pressed into her chest. Her voice broke when she finally forced it out. Lieutenant General Marcus Hale. The silence that followed was heavier than any gunfight. Egleston didn't move, didn't breathe. Only her eyes flickered, sharp with recognition, with rage, with something Briany couldn't read. Hale wasn't just any officer. He was respected, decorated, untouchable. A man who sat at the same tables as Egleston. A man who had power enough to bury entire truths. Briany's voice dropped to a whisper. His signature was on the last order Shadow 4 ever received. He sent us into that house, and he was the only one who had access to both the grid coordinates and the comms channel we used. I've traced the leaks back to his authorizations, the shipments, the silence, all of it. Her chest heaved. The words were out. The name was no longer locked inside her. Egleston finally leaned back, exhaling like someone who'd just been shot but refused to fall. You realize what this means? Briany nodded. Her eyes glistened but didn't break. Yes, ma'am, it means the war isn't out there anymore. It's in here. And for the first time, General Egleston reached across the table, resting a steady hand over Briany's trembling fist. Then we fight it, together. The shadows were no longer outside the wire. They were wearing stars. How do you confront a man powerful enough to erase you with a single order? That question sat heavy in Briany's chest as the days closed in around her. General Hale's name was no longer locked inside her. It had been spoken aloud, released into air that now felt more dangerous to breathe. But saying the name was only the first step. To take him down, they needed evidence that could not be buried, and the closer they moved, the more the ground shook beneath them. General Egleston shifted their operations underground. Fewer eyes, fewer mouths, trusted circles only, phones collected at the door, files carried by hand, never transmitted. Every move was shadowed by the fear that Hale already suspected. Briany worked through nights, her fingers tracing signals, frequencies, procurement logs. Every lead wound back to him. His signature on contracts disguised as aid shipments. His authorizations on convoy schedules that never arrived where they were supposed to. His voice buried in encrypted chatter she had decrypted alone in the silence of her barracks. And yet he still stood in the daylight, smiling for cameras, shaking hands, draping medals across the chests of soldiers who would never know his betrayal. The strain of secrecy gnawed at her. Every time she walked across the base, she felt eyes linger too long. Whispers followed her. Operators who had bled beside her in Odessa and Tripoli now looked at her differently. Some with respect, others with unease. If she could uncover a general, what else could she expose? Late one evening, after hours buried in intercepts, she felt the first true ripple of danger. A message slipped into her inbox, anonymous, untraceable. Stop digging. Some ghosts are meant to stay buried. Her stomach knotted. She didn't tell Egleston right away. Part of her feared it wasn't just a threat. It was a warning, and warnings only came from those close enough to know you. Listen. Still, she pressed on, because stopping would mean admitting Hale had already won. The next mission wasn't combat, it was surveillance. A secure facility stateside, tucked behind innocuous fences and guard posts. Hale's fingerprints were all over it, front companies listed as owners, but the communications array was unmistakable. Military grade, unauthorized. They went in at night, a skeleton crew. No rifles, no breach, just silence, cameras, and shadows. Briany crouched by the perimeter fence, headset pressed tight. Her hands shook, but her voice stayed calm as she guided the team inside. What they found made her breath hitch. Not just weapons, not just shipments, files, drives, logs of financial transactions linking directly to Hale's office. Proof. The exfil was clean, too clean, as if someone had let them walk out. Back in the briefing room, the drive sat heavy on the table between Briany and Egleston. Both women stared at them in silence, knowing what they meant. "This is it," Egleston said quietly, "the final line." Briany's chest tightened, "And when we cross it." The general's eyes darkened. "We don't get to come back." For the first time in years, Briany felt her pulse quicken, not from fear of dying, but from fear of living long enough to see just how much further this betrayal reached. The confrontation was no longer a matter of if. It was when. What does it feel like to stand in front of the man who killed your family, not with bullets but with betrayal? Briany had imagined it 1,000 times in silence, but nothing prepared her for the weight of seeing General Marcus Hale in the flesh, knowing the truth, knowing every word she carried could either end him or bury her forever. The confrontation wasn't loud, it wasn't cinematic, it was planned like a scalpel cut, not a hammer blow. Egleston arranged it inside a secure conference wing at the Pentagon, a place wrapped in steel, silence, and classified clearances. No press, no aides, just 3 people in a room that suddenly felt smaller than a coffin. Hale arrived with the confidence of a man who thought himself untouchable. His uniform immaculate, stars gleaming, posture radiating the arrogance of decades of unchecked power. He smiled at Egleston, then glanced at Briany as if she were invisible, a detail, furniture. But when she met his eyes, he faltered, just for a second. Egleston began with formality, her voice like sharpened steel. "General Hale, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. We're here to discuss irregularities discovered in procurement and operations files. Staff Sergeant Concord has been central to the investigation." Hale's gaze slid back to Briany. He tilted his head, feigning recognition. "The comms girl." His tone dripped with dismissal. "I thought you were still pushing convoy logs at Campbell." Briany's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream, to slam the evidence into his chest, to ask him if he remembered the 11 he left in the dirt. But she didn't. She spoke evenly, voice calm, each word deliberate. "You sent us to die," she said. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the air system seemed to vanish. Egleston's eyes flicked toward her, but she didn't intervene. This was Briany's moment. Hale's smirk wavered, then returned, thinner. "I don't know what fairy tale you've been told, Sergeant. Operations fail. People die. It's the nature of war." Briany leaned forward. Her voice dropped lower, steadier, sharper. "Not like that. Not with our coordinates leaked to the very people we were hunting. Not with procurement codes traced back to your office. Not with encrypted messages signed in your cadence. For the first time, Hale's eyes hardened. He straightened in his chair, the mask slipping just enough to reveal what hid beneath. "You have no idea what lines you're crossing," he hissed. "You think one survivor's word outweighs decades of service. You think you can stand in here and—" She cut him off, voice like a blade. "I don't think I know. I lived. And I've been watching you feed the same network that murdered my team." Egleston slid a folder across the table, thick, heavy, every page stamped classified. "It isn't her word alone," she said coldly. "We have proof. Documents, manifests, financial trails, comms intercepts. Enough to burn your career to ash." Hale's hand hovered over the folder but didn't touch it. His knuckles whitened. For a man who had always controlled the room, the loss of power was suffocating. Briany leaned closer, her eyes never leaving his. "You tried to erase me, to erase them, but shadows don't disappear. They wait. And now they finish what they started." For a long moment, no one spoke. The three of them sat in the silence of truths too heavy to escape. Finally, Hale chuckled, dry, bitter. "You think justice exists in these halls. You think anyone cares about your ghosts." Briany stood. Her legs shook, but her voice didn't. "Justice isn't what I'm here for. I'm here for dignity. For the 11 who trusted you and died because of you. For the silence you thought would bury me. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts." Eggleston's signal was subtle, a glance toward the door. Two security officers stepped in, men who had been waiting beyond the soundproof walls. Hale's smirk finally cracked as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. "You'll never prove," he started, but his words were drowned by the sound of his own chair scraping back, powerless for the first time in years. Briany didn't watch him go. She didn't need to. Her eyes stayed fixed on the table, on the empty folder that had carried the weight of 5 years of silence. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from release. Egleston touched her shoulder gently. "It's over." Briany shook her head slowly. "No, ma'am, it's never over, but it's finished for him." As she walked out of the Pentagon that night, the air felt different. Colder, sharper, but lighter somehow. The ghosts still walked with her, but for the first time they didn't weigh her down. They walked beside her. For 2 years she had been invisible. For 5 years she had been dead. But tonight she was neither. Tonight she was Shadow 4. And sometimes shadows don't just survive, they rise.